Giant's Causeway on the coast of Northern Ireland is one of the UK's outstanding natural features. Its steep cliffs and deep bays form a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Tourists and National Trust rangers saw the legendary Finn disappear into a magical doorway within the rock face here at the Giant's Causeway.
Midnight, along the northern coast of County Antrim, where the Atlantic has spent 60 million years arguing with the rock, there's a stretch of cliff that most maps simply label unstable. Not dangerous in the way a landslide is dangerous. Unstable in a quieter, stranger sense. A section of coastline where local surveyors have long complained that their instruments drift, where compasses wobble for no reason anyone can explain, and where, for at least 2 generations, a single slab of dark stone has drawn attention for something it should never be able to do. 024, it moves. 026, not often, not predictably, but often enough that it has a name among the handful of people who study that coastline closely, the Hinge Stone. And in the autumn of last year, after decades of dismissed sightings and grainy, inconclusive photographs, someone finally decided to find out what was on the other side of it. 046. This is the story of what they found, and why almost none of it has ever been made public until now. 053. To understand why the Hinge Stone mattered, you have to understand what it isn't. It isn't part of the famous hexagonal columns that draw 1 million visitors a year to the coast nearby. Those columns are basalt, born when ancient lava sheets cooled and cracked into their strange, almost architectural geometry. Tourists photograph them because they look impossible, built rather than grown. But geologists have understood that process for well over a century. Cooling contraction, predictable fracture. Nothing supernatural about it, however striking it looks. 124. The Hinge Stone sits apart from all of that, tucked into a fold of cliff that most walking tours never reach. It is a single slab, roughly the size of a delivery van, embedded flush into the surrounding rock face, so precisely that for years it was assumed to simply be another part of the formation, until people started noticing that every so often it wasn't where it had been the week before. A few centimeters here, a shifted shadow there. Nothing dramatic enough to make headlines, until a hiking group filmed it swinging open in broad daylight and closing again 40 seconds later, leaving no crack, no rubble, no sign it had moved at all. 157. That footage spread the way this kind of footage always does, shared, mocked, forgotten within a week by almost everyone who saw it. Almost everyone. 207. The exception was a woman named Aoife Brennan, a structural geologist who had spent the better part of 15 years mapping coastal rock stability for infrastructure surveys, the least glamorous job imaginable in a field already short on glamour. She had built a career on being unimpressed by strange rock formations because she had personally explained away hundreds of them. Sinkholes, erosion pockets, optical illusions caused by wet stone catching low sun. She was, by every account from people who worked with her, allergic to mystery. 237, which is exactly why her reaction to the Hinge Stone footage mattered. 241, she didn't watch the movement. She watched the edge, the precise line where the stone met the surrounding rock. And what she didn't see there is what kept her up that night. Basalt, when it fractures or shifts even slightly, leaves evidence. Microfractures spidering outward. A fine dusting of crushed mineral along the seam. Some visible scar, even a small one, because stone this dense does not move without leaving a mark on itself. 307, there was no mark. The edge in that footage was as clean after the movement as it had been before, as though the rock had simply chosen, briefly, not to be solid. 317 Brennan later told a colleague, one of the only people she spoke to honestly about this before everything that followed, that she watched the clip 11 times looking for trick, a compression artifact, a hidden cut, anything that would let her file it away as noise. She never found one, and the longer she looked, the more the absence of evidence became its own kind of evidence. 339. So she did something almost nobody in her position would have done. She applied for and quietly received limited access to conduct a subsurface survey of the section of cliff adjacent to the Hinge Stone, officially framed as routine erosion monitoring, the kind of paperwork nobody reads closely. Unofficially, she had one target in mind, and it wasn't the door itself. 402, she had learned, The hard way. That direct approaches to strange things rarely work. Basalt that thick resists boring for hours. Attacking the hinged head-on risks destabilizing the whole face for nothing. So instead, she did what her training told her to do. She looked for weakness nearby. Volcanic rock never cools as one uniform mass. It cools unevenly, leaving pockets of lower density, planes of internal stress invisible from the surface, but readable if you know how to trace grain direction and thermal flow history. 433. She spent 3 days with hand tools and a portable resistivity scanner, working a stretch of cliff face roughly 4 meters from the stone, before she found what she was looking for, a section where the density readings dropped just enough to suggest something other than solid rock behind it. 450 on the 4th day. She brought in a narrow-bore drill rig, the kind used for structural coring, fitted with an extended masonry bit designed to punch controlled channel without widening the entry point. The goal, she told her one assistant that morning, was simply to confirm whether there was a natural void back there. Nothing more. She was very clear about that. Confirm and document. Nothing more. 514. The first 1.5 meters of drilling behaved exactly as expected. Dense basalt, steady resistance, the flat mechanical grind of a bit cutting on a stone. The dust coming back up the bore was fine and dark, unremarkable. For nearly 40 minutes, nothing about the process suggested anything unusual was ahead. 534. Then, without warning, the resistance disappeared. 538. Her assistant, who was operating the support winch, later described it as a drill falling rather than breaking through, a sudden loss of tension that jolted the rig forward several inches before Brennan could kill the power. She stood there afterward, by her own account, simply holding the tool for almost a full minute before doing anything else, because some part of her understood, before she'd seen a single thing, that they had just opened something that had been closed for a very long time. 605. What unsettled her first wasn't sight. It was silence. 609. She held the back of her bare hand to the newly opened channel, checking for airflow the way any field surveyor would. Natural voids in coastal rock almost always breathe, at least faintly, as pressure equalizes with tide and weather. She felt nothing. No draw, no push, no whisper of moving air. A cavity that had genuinely been sealed for centuries should have shown some sign of that slow equalization. This one showed none at all, which told her something she didn't want to be told. Whatever was on the other side hadn't simply been forgotten by geology. It had been kept shut. 644. She widened the bore only enough to feed through a micro camera mounted on a slim track crawler, the kind normally used for pipe inspection, and she sent it forward the way you'd lower an instrument into water of unknown depth, carefully, and with a growing sense that you might not get it back. 702. What the camera found in the first several meters was almost ordinary. Rough, broken basalt, consistent with any natural cavity along that coast. But the floor was wrong. It was too level, smooth in a way that raw, fractured stone never is on its own, as though something at some point had deliberately flattened it and then left it undisturbed for a very long time. 723. Then the crawler's lights caught the first of the shapes. 727. They hung from somewhere overhead in a loose cluster, dull-surfaced, absorbing the camera's light rather than reflecting it. Brennan's own notes, recovered later by the colleague she eventually confided in, describe them only as suspended forms, indeterminate, because the footage would not resolve them into anything more specific. There was a faint, persistent inconsistency to their position from one frame to the next, a shift too small to be certain of, in a sealed space where nothing should have been moving them at all. 756. Beneath the forms. The floor darkened into shallow, uneven pools of liquid that caught the crawler's light and scattered it unpredictably. No stains matched anything she recognized from years of documenting coastal mineral seepage. No obvious source fed the pools, and yet they held their shape and shimmer, as though something beneath the surface kept disturbing them. 818. The crawler pushed on, and the air itself began working against the lens. Suspended moisture. Not falling, not heavy enough to register as rain, but dense enough to soften every edge in the frame. Turned distance into a guess, and it was through that haze that the camera tilted upward and found the ceiling. 838. There were lines in it. Straight lines, evenly spaced, running horizontally through curved natural stone where nothing about ordinary volcanic cooling should ever produce a straight line at all. Structures embedded directly into the rock, not hanging from it, not carved into it after the fact, but integrated into the formation itself, at intervals that echoed the spacing of the suspended shapes below. 902. This was a detail Brennan could not talk herself out of afterward. Basalt geometry, however striking, is always a geometry of accident. Stress and cooling repeated at scale. What the camera was showing her was a geometry of intention, regular, measured, connected, somehow, to whatever hung beneath it. 923. The crawler continued for roughly 18 meters before the ground beneath it changed again, the thin liquid layer deepening just enough to rob the treads of traction, the signal beginning to break into static that came and went in unpredictable bursts. And then, at the very edge of the frame, something flared. 942. A burst of light, brighter than the crawler's own lamps, though not by much, visible for less than a second before vanishing without any lingering glow or obvious source. Brennan stopped the unit, held position, and waited. Nothing happened again. She scrubbed back through the recorded frames and found it there, consistent across several of them. Not a lens artifact, not a reflection off the crawler's own housing, but something external that had briefly produced its own light in a chamber that, by every measure she had, should have been utterly without power source of any kind. 1014, she pushed the crawler a short distance further, toward where the flare had come from. And that is where the survey effectively ended. The treads lost their grip entirely in the softened ground. The signal degraded past the point of reliable control, and, in her own later words to her colleague, she made a decision to withdraw before she lost the ability to make any decision at all. 1037, she has never fully explained, even privately, whether that decision was about equipment risk or about something closer to instinct refusing to go any further. 1047, the crawler was recovered. The footage was preserved, though large portions of it remained difficult to interpret cleanly, degraded by moisture and interference in ways that seem, if anything, to worsen the closer the unit gets to whatever produced that flare of light. Brennan sealed the bore hole herself within the week, not with any official notice, simply and quietly, leaving the cliff face looking exactly as undisturbed as it had before she arrived. 1112. The hinged stone itself has not been recorded moving since. 1116. There is no institutional record of any of this. No published survey results beyond the routine erosion report that was filed and forgotten. What exists is a small amount of degraded footage, a handful of field notes, and the account of a geologist who spent her career being professionally skeptical of exactly this kind of story, and who has never once, in describing what she found, been willing to call it natural. 1141. What makes this account different from the countless other strange doorway stories that circulate every year isn't the drama of it. There wasn't much drama. In the end, just a slow, careful survey that quietly stopped being about erosion monitoring. What makes it different is the absence of the evidence that should have been there. No fracture marks on a stone that supposedly swings open. No airflow in a cavity that should have breathed for centuries. No natural source for light that appeared and disappeared in total darkness 18 meters underground. 1211 basalt only ever tells you the truth about how it formed, if you know how to read it. Every column, every fracture line, every seam is a record of physics doing exactly what physics does. That's what made the hinged stone different. It didn't behave like something that had happened to the landscape. It behaved like something that had been placed inside it. 1233. Whether that placement was ancient, deliberate, and human, echoing the same legends locals have told about that coastline for centuries, or something else entirely is a question nobody involved in this has been willing to answer definitively. Brennan herself, when pressed, has only ever offered one careful sentence on the subject, that whatever is behind that stone was not shaped by the same forces that shaped everything around it. 1258. The borehole is sealed. The stone has not moved again, at least not that anyone has recorded, but the coastline is enormous, riddled with folds and hollows no survey has ever fully mapped, and the section Brennan reached may be only a small piece of something considerably larger, still sitting undisturbed beneath one of the most photographed shorelines in Europe. 1320. So the question we're sitting with isn't really whether the hinged stone will open again. It's what, exactly, has been waiting behind it this entire time, patient, sealed, and until recently, completely undiscovered. 1334. If you have your own theory about what Brennan's crawler found in that chamber, deliberate construction, some overlooked geological process, or something else you think explains it better, leave it in the comments. Stories like this one tend to attract people who've seen something similar, and sometimes the best explanations come from exactly that kind of first-hand account.